All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to True Correct Loser. I hope you're doing well. So, folks, today a couple people asked me if I could talk about the sentencing of Chandler Halderson, and I don't have a better idea for an episode this week, so here we are. I don't know how long it's going to take, so after we talk about Chandler's sentencing, I'm going to tell you the quick story of a woman named Tanya Head that, just like Chandler, cooked up a completely made-up life for herself. And just like Chandler, it came crashing down beyond anything she could have ever imagined. And just like that, with the story of Tanya Head, we officially have another hoax that failed miserably. Okay, but let's talk about Chandler first. The sentencing, the big sentencing day was a couple weeks ago. Leading into the big day, a funny news story broke that Chandler didn't want to attend his own sentencing. I imagine sitting there while well-spoken adults articulate how miserable and pathetic your life is and has become and will most likely always will be isn't the best feeling to sit there like, well, I blew it this time. I'm Chandler. There aren't great options for lawyers to submit a motion to have the defendant not appear at his own sentencing, especially when there's no good reason to do it. So the motion was hilarious. It was something like, Chandler waives his right to attend. And then I think everybody thought about it and was like, yeah, that's just literally not a thing. We'll just postpone it. If there's a good reason he can't go, why would we have it with him not there? How absurd would that be? Victim impact statements are being read and it just keeps cutting to an empty chair where Chandler's supposed to be. The judge is giving his big speech at the end. It just keeps cutting to the empty chair. Sorry, Chandler, you gotta come, buddy. I know, it's tough. So the sentencing kicked off. First, before we talk about how it kicked off, the whole thing seemed pretty quiet and uneventful. But then I was thinking it's probably just because after the Jussie Smollett sentencing, where he proclaimed that he's not suicidal and he yelled about fisting, I think all sentencings are going to seem a little bit quiet and uneventful for a while. But it kicked off with the female prosecutor reading some victim impact statements. One was from Chandler's brother Mitch's fiance, and she said the things that everybody would say, which is, if he did this to his parents, for that, how am I or my family, we're connected to Chandler, how are we ever going to be safe? And also, she was talking about, this really stuck with me, they're planning their wedding. I think, if I understand it right, they're going to get married in June, so a couple months from now, but they've been planning their wedding this whole time. And it sounds like every piece of planning the wedding, and I'm sure the wedding itself, is just a stark reminder, like a club over the head, that Chandler ruined everything. How do you even sit there and plan a wedding? I picture them both just sitting there in despair, thinking about how Chandler ruined their family. And she's like, you know what? They would want us... Bart and Krista would want us to plan our wedding and have a good day, so let's just keep planning this. I know it's tough, so should we do like a steak chicken choice thing, or should we go with a taco bar? They both just burst into tears. Like, how would you even go about planning it? And then the wedding itself, especially her parents are probably going to be there, or her whole family's going to be there. It's her wedding, and Mitch is probably going to be reminded that Chandler ruined his whole family forever. It's going to be hard to break it down to Cotton Eye Joe with what happened. Imagine they don't tell the DJ. He's like, all right, everybody, would the parents come to the dance floor? Both sets of parents, let's go. Turns on Cotton Eye Joe. They're going, no, whoa, what are you doing, man? So I feel bad for them. Everybody's still that's dealing with that. They're trying to have this big day, this big celebration, this big life moment, and the whole thing is overshadowed by what Chandler did. So she reads that victim impact statement. I thought it was solid. And then she reads one from Chandler's grandma. And grandma has the opinion that Bart and Krista, who Chandler murdered for pretty much no reason, grandma feels that Bart and Krista wouldn't want their son in prison for the rest of his life. And she hopes that he'll learn a craft or a trade while in prison, and eventually, after the judge does allow him to have a possibility of parole, someday get out and be a productive member of society. And I'm sure everybody that was listening to it was like, yeah, sorry, Grandma, not happening. So that was the female prosecutor, and then it got to the male prosecutor. He became a bit of a celebrity through this whole thing. Good prosecutor. His opening statement got a bunch of views, I think like 250,000 views on YouTube. But he delivered the part of the prosecution's part that was why Chandler should not have the possibility of parole. And you see so many speeches by both prosecution and defense attorneys, and most of them have this element of theater to it, right? They're saying what they need to say for the court case, but there's also this performative element to it. And you got to. They are actually performing, but they're up there, the tone, they're trying to get the vibe of the courtroom the way they want it. But with this prosecutor's statement, I would say it had the least amount of theater of any that I've ever seen. It really was down to what a sentencing recommendation speech should be, especially with what he did was so bad. He was just saying what anyone that was worried about the community would say. There was like this tone to it where it was soft, and he was just going, if Chandler Halderson solves a minor inconvenience with life with what he did, we will never be safe. This community will never be safe. We will all encounter minor inconveniences of life. They will keep happening. That's the way life is. And his inability to handle, and it just was that tone, which it didn't feel like a lot of the big performance. It felt like someone actually just saying what needed to be said to keep a community safe. If he did that for that, we can't have him just walking around, and it really would be absurd, right? All right, so you don't work at SpaceX and you're not an idiot with weak legs. And he does that. And so there's just no way. It would be totally absurd for him to get out. And so he gave a very soft, passionate, just truth. Really no theater or big performance aspects were necessary. It just was what anybody that thought about it for a few minutes, like, oh my gosh, what if he ever got out, would say. And just like his opening statement, it was great. It's a solid prosecutor. So then it moves over to Chandler's defense. It's their turn. If you remember, I ripped his defense attorney, Vera, to absolute shreds with her closing argument. It was awful. Everything about it was just pretty embarrassing. This speech she gave was much better. I don't know if she was just thrown off by how guilty her client was and how bad he came off for, mutilating the corpse in the fireplace, all that stuff. I don't know if she was thrown off in the actual trial, and then once the guilty verdict came down, it allowed her to be like, oh, all right, I need to just kind of center myself and get back to work. But her speech was much better. The strategy was good. It's what I would have gone with, and that is, she basically said, we know that Chandler is going to go to jail for a really long time. All that we are asking, Your Honor, is that sometime way down the road, give him a possibility of parole, right? Maybe it's always turned down. Maybe it never happens. It's going to be up to you or whatever judge. She was kind of stroking the judge's ego a little bit, being like, it will be up to you. If it ever happens, which maybe it probably won't, but if it does, let's just give him the chance way down the road to rehabilitate. It'll be up to you. Just a chance for parole, though, way down the road. And I think just that strategy of putting it on the judge, being like, it'll be up to you, or the judge in charge, just a possibility. We're not asking for this. We're not asking, just... And so then she wraps up that speech, and then it gets to Chandler's turn if he wants to speak. And at first it was a no, and then all of a sudden it was like, yes, Chandler is going to speak. And then the judge goes, okay, well, the status of the pandemic in the jail is actually really good. So if you want to remove your mask, I think that would be good for the little speech. And then Chandler kind of looks at the lawyer like, should I remove it? Is that okay? And the lawyer goes, yeah, remove it. And Chandler looks really irked. He pulls the mask down, but he doesn't look happy about it. And you can really see that spoiled anger bubble up, even in just that one moment, the only moment that I'm aware of that you can see his whole face. He just looks irked, and he looks mad, and he's not happy that he pulled his comfort blanket COVID mask down, and he's ready to read his little spiel and then get the mask back up. But then the judge interrupts him and goes, just make sure you read slow, because the court reporter has to take this all down. Sometimes we read pretty fast. And again, he just looks mad that he pulled the mask down, and now he's like, other things are happening. But then it comes time to read his little statement. He hasn't made any statement at all through this whole thing. It's like, all right, is he going to apologize to the people still around? Is he going to show a little remorse to try to play the game, even if it's fake? What's he going to do? And he says, what does he say? He says, I would like to take this moment to state my intent that I'm going to appeal my convictions. It's like, all right, starting out with just talking about yourself. Don't know how that is going to work, but there you go. So he's going to appeal his convictions, and he says, if there's any lawyers watching, please take a second to reach out to me. And then he says, it's not that I do not have feelings. It's that I was instructed not to show them because of the scrutiny of this case. Thank you. And then the judge just goes, thank you. And it was very quick, seemed really quick. But let's just think about that. So obviously, well, I guess I don't know obviously, but I'm 99% sure that's totally untrue. I don't know why his lawyers would have the strategic move when he couldn't look more like a lizard, right? You do that to your family for that, and then you just sit there. Oh yeah, in the female prosecutor, in her little spiel, she talked about, she went over all of the jailhouse phone conversations, everything, and listened to him, and she said Chandler hasn't shown any remorse, any sadness, nothing about losing his parents. You would think it would hit somewhere and just go, oh man, my support system, these people really loved me. Even if he's just a total psycho, it's like, man, these people really loved me, and now I'm alone. But I guess there was nothing. And so Chandler goes, it's not that I do not have feelings. It's like, what a lizard. It's not that I do not have feelings. It's I was instructed not to show them because of the scrutiny of this case. Who would tell you that? Chandler, would his lawyers really say, all right, Chandler, you look horrible because you brutally murdered your parents. You look like a total lizard. So on top of that, if you could just show no remorse or emotion, I think it'll help the case. Yeah. And then also he goes, I was instructed not to show them because of the scrutiny of this case. I was thinking about it. This case probably had the least amount of scrutiny of any case I can remember. Where was the scrutiny? Everybody just watched it like, man, whoa. But I didn't hear anyone scrutinize any part of it. If anything, the judge gets more praise than most judges that I've seen. It's like, this is the greatest judge. Could this judge be cloned and put on all cases? Like on cases where there's scrutiny, a lot, like there's a group that hates the judge, a group that loves the judge, it's political, whatever it is. But this case, it just kind of went through the way it was tough, but I can't think of any scrutiny, Chandler, the whole time. But anyway, he did the whole, it's not that I don't have feelings, it's I was instructed not to show them. Thank you. Okay, so that was his, and then he quickly gets the COVID mask back on, gets it around his nose. I think it, like a lot of people during these times, it's the big security blanket during the trial. You know, I'm going to be happy when those are gone during the court, because Chandler is going to go back, probably go to prison forever. That's it. He'll be gone. He's going to be in the concrete fart hole, and that'll be it. This is the trial and the sentencing. That's the one time that the public, you get to get a good look at them, see how they're feeling about the whole thing, see their facial expressions, and to have that part taken away by the COVID mask bums me out sometimes. So then it's the big speech by the judge. He's been praised by, like I said, pretty much everybody likes him. There's no scrutiny on his end, at least that I've seen. And he was very emotional and getting choked up, and his eyes were welling up as he talks about he's passionate for the system, the justice system. He's passionate about their community. He's passionate about, he's learned a lot about Bart and Krista through the process of the trial, and just said that it seemed like they were great people. It feels like you know them, you know, feels like anyone could be friends with them. And it really felt like, almost like how the prosecutor felt like he was talking to his own community. It didn't feel like a big performance, we're doing this trial thing. It just felt like, well, here we all are in this community together, and we don't want this guy around. It would be unsafe. So he gives the speech. Can't really see how Chandler's taking it because he's got the mask on, but you know that he already had said, I'm going to appeal. I'm going to take this moment to state my intent to appeal. He didn't want to come to the sentencing, so I think by that he's saying, I don't agree with this verdict, so I'm not even going to participate. I'm going to appeal anyway, so this is all just nothing. There's no point for me to even go. All right. So the judge does the emotional, well-spoken, laid down the law for old Chandler, and then it ends with life in prison without the possibility of parole. He tells Chandler, you got 20 days to appeal. Anything else on that one? Chandler isn't going to use the lawyers. He wants 2 new ones. I can't imagine that appeal is going to go any different than the trial went. There wasn't any moments of the trial that was like, hey, that doesn't seem fair. So we'll see. So just like Jussie Smollett, everything is riding on that appeal for old Chandler. And we'll see how it goes. All right, so real quick, last, 5 minutes, I'm going to talk about Tanya Head, which, like I said, is another hoax that failed miserably. I said I enjoy a nice hoax that tanks, and someone recommended me the documentary about this. It's called The Woman Who Wasn't There. And Tanya was a woman from Barcelona, Spain. She's light complexion, but she moves to the United States, dyes her hair blonde, and pretends to be American. All right. And 9/11, the massive terrorist attack, tragedy, the whole thing goes down. And this documentary, which I didn't know, but you can imagine a lot of the people that were in the towers had a hell of a time getting over the whole thing. They'd have dreams about it. They'd think about it all day. They would have horrible depression of all these people didn't make it. I was the one that was lucky enough to get out. And they were all, or a lot of them, like I said, were having a totally hard time moving on, feeling okay about it. So they grouped up. They made a community. It became, I can't remember the exact term, but it was like the 9/11 Survivors Club, or, you can imagine. So it's all these people, and they would get together, and they would share their survival stories, and they would do events and do dinners and just be there for each other. And it really is a beautiful story. It helped them get past the horrible event that they went through. There's pictures of them, eating or doing an outside event or doing a barbecue, and politicians would show up because these are the survivors of 9/11. And so politicians would show up and they'd do a picture where they're shaking hands. Maybe a ribbon would be cut because they get financing for something. And so it's just this big group of survivors of 9/11. Well, there's this guy is the president of it. And this woman named Tanya Head, who not only has her survivor story that she's willing to share with everybody for the healing and everything, but Tanya Head's survivor story is way worse and way more graphic and way, for a lot of them, more unbelievable than anyone else's survivor story by far. She says her husband or fiance, she kind of goes back and forth, was in the North Tower and she's in the South Tower, and she sees the North Tower get hit and her husband's in there, and oh my God, and then all of a sudden the tower she's in gets hit right where she is, and she's in there in the fire, and her arm is only being held on by one thread of skin, and she bravely crawls out over the dead body and the carnage and the horribleness, and her arm, one thread of skin, and she spends all this time in the hospital, and it's horrible, and everybody's like, man, my survivor story is pretty bad, but nothing compared to Tanya Head's, and she becomes almost the poster 9/11 survivor here in New York City. And so when the politician comes to hang out with all the survivors and support, she's the one shaking the hand in the big picture. And all of her friends are other survivors. And at one point, her best friend is another survivor, and Tanya asked this best friend, she goes, I'm doing this therapy, it's called flooding, and I'd love for you to come with me. And her friend is like, okay, so they go, and what flooding is basically Tanya Head and her friend, who was actually in 9/11, they're crawling around, pretending they're in the building with the fire. My arm. They're reliving it to try to get past it, I guess, is the point of the therapy. But at a certain point, the woman that was actually in 9/11 tells Tanya, that she thinks they're best friends. At this point, she goes, I can't do this anymore. It's too hard for me. I'm happy that it helps you, and crawling around and pretending you're back in the building in the fire with your arm. I'm glad that it helps you, but I just can't do it anymore. It really just throws me off. And Tanya Head, to a real survivor that got out of the building, is going, are you serious? I need this for my recovery, and you're being selfish. And her friend was like, am I just a terrible person? And the years are going on, and she's becoming more of the poster 9/11 survivor. The president of the big 9/11 survivors association gets pushed out. All of a sudden, everyone kind of hates him. And he's like, what is happening? I've been a good president. And he looks, and they're like, you're not going to be the president anymore. And he looks, and they voted Tanya Head. Now she is the president of the 9/11 survivors. And I think that may have been her downfall, because as she became the poster, now she's the president of this and that, the New York Times wants to do an article on her. And she is not being outright with answering some of the questions, which leads the reporter to look into it further, and he's finding all of these weird things. He can't find what hospital she supposedly spent all this time in. She can't find this. She can't find that. And slowly it comes out that Tanya Head was not even in the States during 9/11. She was in her hometown of Barcelona. She comes from this family that I think her dad and brother have been in jail for fraud. All of her friends and family back in Barcelona are like, wait, what did she do? She said she was in 9/11? That's crazy. Yeah, she definitely wasn't. And so now her whole life, all these pictures with her at like barbecues and stuff, it was, like I said, a complete hoax that failed miserably. And an interesting wrinkle of the story is when it all came out, And her friends were going, just answer the New York Times question. What are you doing? Because she was going, this guy, he's asking these follow-up questions. And they're like, well, why don't you just answer them? And then her friends started to have suspicions. And then the whole thing unraveled. And an interesting little wrinkle about the whole thing is no one knows where she is to this day. When she got busted, she disappeared. And no one knows where she is. So it's going to be interesting. Where does Tanya Head pop up? I had to talk about this because I had already talked about that comedian Steve Razzazzini, or whatever his name is, the comedian Steve that pretended that he was in one of the towers on 9/11. And he has, I'm pretty sure, works in show business still. He went on Stern, took a beating, they made fun of him, he came out, he was honest about it so he could move on. But I still think about it as like, you got your foot in the door. The hardest thing about a show business career is just getting the whole thing off the ground. And whether he goes on Stern or apologizes or not, I still feel like he got his foot in the door, the whole thing off the ground, by pretending he was in 9/11. Maybe him and Tanya are dating now in Spain. I have no idea. But I'm going to cut it off there. I do love you all. We're not here for any reason. Why, Stive, and why?